So I recently watched the movie It's a Wonderful Life, and I thought I would come on here and give my review of the film. It's a Wonderful Life is one of those movies that I think everyone should watch at least once. For one thing, I think it has a great message that sometimes we don't always see how much good we've done in life or how many lives we've touched. But it's also just a movie that by the end has such a feel-good sense to it. And for me, I feel like that's the kind of movie I want to watch from time to time. This story basically follows the life of a man named George Bailey of Bedford Falls, who is accompanied by his guardian angel, who ends up showing him just how much of a difference his life has made. I think that's a very beautiful concept, but I also think it's just so well done, especially if you consider the time that it was made. I will get to some of my personal pet peeves with some issues that I think are very much result of just the time period that the film was made in. But I think that the way the story is told is very intriguing. I also like the fact that a lot of the events we see are in chronological order. I feel like with so many modern films, especially the past couple of decades, there's so much jumping around between past and present, and I don't like that as much. It really is okay to just tell a story in chronological order. That kind of simple filmmaking that's just a straightforward, this is the story type of approach, I miss that. Another thing I really like about this movie is that even though it really just focuses on the life of this one character, you see so many characters throughout the movie that interact with George. You see their effect on him, you see how he has impacted their lives. I really appreciate seeing the development of those relationships throughout this movie. So for example, George's relationship with Mr. Potter. Mr. Potter is basically this big business guy who is taking over pretty much everything in town except for the business that George's father started. And that business is getting people into homes. So George's father starts this business basically with the belief that anyone who is willing to work for it should be able to build a home and have their own place. And George is really more of an adventurer. He might appreciate what his dad does, but he has all these big goals, all these big dreams. He sacrifices all of his dreams to keep his father's business afloat. And you actually see several sacrifices throughout this movie where he really does what he can to stand up to Mr. Potter and to keep this business going. And in spite of all of those efforts, he, through no fault of his own really, finds himself in a dilemma and a crisis with this business. And that's what puts him into a terrible state in which he needs the intervention of this guardian angel. The conflict between him and Mr. Potter, I think, is actually one of the most interesting aspects of this movie. Because for one thing, it touches everyone's lives. Who doesn't know someone who has been impacted by some big business guy who has tried to hurt the little guy with their company? I think everyone knows someone who's been through that, at least to some degree. So watching him stand up to that and some of the speeches he gives where he tries to make the case that, you know, you should not just come in here and take over everything and take opportunities away from people, just seeing that kind of passion is something that is just really inspiring and admirable to me. But then you also see him in need of assistance from Mr. Potter and struggling with that and having to go to him for help. And the reality of the fact that it's difficult to be a small business owner that's willing to stand up to corporations for the sake of fighting for the little guy. So there are a lot of things that are very interesting about this movie, but that's probably what I found the most interesting was his relationship with Mr. Potter. I also appreciated the character of Mary a lot, but I really feel like she deserved a bit better than George, which I will get to in my spoiler section in just a minute. The cop, Bert, and the taxi driver, Ernie, I think were some pretty interesting characters as well. Just watching his relationship with them throughout the movie was very fun. The guardian angel himself, I think, was actually a pretty interesting character in his own right. So I think what makes this movie so enjoyable to watch, especially after all this time, is that so many movies fall on one side or the other. They're either driven by the plot or they're driven by the characters, and I feel like this is very much a combination of both. It never takes away from the fact that it is focused on this particular storyline, but you still get to see the development of all these characters, and I feel like a lot of times with plot-driven stories, the character development and seeing those relationships is a bit overlooked. And I feel like for a 2-hour movie filmed in the mid-40s, this does a great job at that. Overall, I will give this movie a 4.5 out of 5 stars. And really that half star is only lost because of the relationship between George and Mary, which I'm about to get into. At this point, there will be spoilers if you have not seen this movie. I don't think it's really going to be wrecked by spoilers. I feel like you can still enjoy it. But if you have not seen it, I would definitely encourage you to do so. And at this point, I'm also going to get a bit political. Here's the thing. George did not deserve Mary. He did not deserve Mary. On what planet did he deserve Mary? And I think this really shows the flaws in society pressuring people to get married. Because George does not seem all that interested at all in being married. His brother gets married, and that seems to kind of increase the pressure. And before he goes over to see Mary, his mom is putting pressure on him. And then she's kind of playing interference a little bit. And she calls Mary and tells her that George is coming over. So Mary invites him in the house, and he didn't really, he looks so uncomfortable in that scene. He does not want to be there. And then he does something that this is a reason I kind of stay away from old movies, because this stuff will be presented as normal and it's not normal. He grabs her and starts shaking her. And a lot of times when you see that in older movies, it's sort of justified by men acting like, well, I had to do it to calm her down, to get her to get a grip, right? She, in that instance, was not being emotional at all. She was not in any way out of control. She was not being aggressive. She was not being out of pocket. She wasn't doing nothing but standing there looking at him with these longing eyes. And to him, that felt like pressure. So he starts shaking her and saying that he doesn't want to get married. And then he just ends up kind of breaking down and starts kissing her all over, which is another thing I'm not a fan of. I hate this thing where a woman can just be present and a man will be completely intoxicated by her. Not saying that never happens, but old school movies make you think it happens a lot more than it does. But here's the thing. Women were expected to be swept off their feet by guys who talked themselves into wanting to marry them. You know, I don't see the appeal. I don't see the appeal. I'm so glad that society has changed. Now, did he eventually deserve marriage and kids? Possibly. But at that point in time, when he's acting so appalled at the thought of marrying Mary and then does it anyways, like, he does not deserve her. He just doesn't. Now, if Mary was, like, mentioned once or twice and was never part of the vocal point of things that he should be thankful for in his life, then I probably wouldn't even mention this. There are so many instances where he just seems to be tolerating her presence, like he does not want to be married to her. Now, one thing I will defend George on is how he treats his family towards the end. He's going through a mental health crisis. Now, I am not excusing him lashing out at his family, but if you look at Mary's face, it is obvious that this is not normal behavior from him. He does not normally treat his family this way. She's shocked that he's acting like this. So I will say there does not seem to be a consistent pattern of mistreating her, but it's the idea that a woman should want to be with a man who doesn't really want to be with her. That drives me crazy. These weird old school storylines of a woman who is just completely infatuated with a man and he doesn't really care and he just kind of shrugs it off, but then eventually feels pressured into it, eventually gives into it. Like, I cannot imagine finding that desirable. I am so glad that I no longer live in a society where I'm expected to find something like that desirable. But aside from Mary, I will say that George does make a massive impact on the community. He makes so many sacrifices, so don't get me wrong, he is a good character. And my issue with the relationship with Mary is really more just a commentary on how marriage was looked at the time. Like, marriage is something you're just supposed to go do. No, marriage is something you should do if you are ready for it, and if you have found someone that makes sense to marry. That's when you should get married. The idea that people should just be pressured into getting married, whether it makes sense or not, whether they thought it through or not, whether they're a good match or not, it's nonsense. Utter nonsense. I do love his strength. I do love his integrity. I love the fact that he makes all of these sacrifices for the community and is so passionate about trying to help people and make a difference. So definitely a great character. Just someone I don't think ever should have been a husband for Mary. Anyways, that's all I have for this video. If you enjoyed this video, have to hear even just a quarter of this video, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe.